And now from Lusofana University, we have Katja Casimiro, who is going to present on what makes a rulebook accessible and entertaining. So you have the floor.
Thank you. I think it's on. Can you please confirm?
Yes, it works.
Okay, perfect. Hi, good afternoon or night. Thank you for the invitation and opportunity to participate in the JARPS Symposium. I'm Katja Casimir. I'm a communication science PhD candidate from Lusofana University in Lisbon, Portugal. And I'm here to present the article, What Makes Rulebooks Accessible and Entertaining? Recommendations for Best Practices. I'll start by providing a summary of the article's content, and then I will focus on presenting recommendations for best practices to make rulebooks accessible. So starting with what we mean by accessibility, accessibility relates to ensuring that all people have full and equal participation in society through the elimination and avoidance of unnecessary barriers for those with and without impairments. According to the social model of disability, impairments are individual and private, whereas what originates disability is the problems created by social, cultural, and environmental barriers, which lead to social exclusion. In terms of research, accessibility has been discussed in several areas, such as web accessibility, physical accessibility, and transportation accessibility. And although research has been conducted on game accessibility, it is mainly focused on video games and scarcely on board games, being almost non-existent in the frame of tabletop role-playing games. Based on this, the main aim of the article is to propose best practices and initiate a discussion on the accessibility of board games and tabletop role-playing games, rulebooks, as there are several problems in their current design and execution. Some of these problems are the complex writing and use of jargon, which may not be accessible to newcomers, for instance. The inaccessibility of the rulebook is mainly noticed when a group is going to play and there's one designated person who is responsible for reading the rules and teaching them to the rest of the group. This can have several implications, especially in complex games where rules can be missed or misinterpreted. This word is not well said, I'm sorry. As the rules of board games are mostly taught orally, it could be possible to argue that they fall into the concept of being a kind of folk game, that is, a game that is passed down informally from one person to another, and where the same game can have different house rules. For example, has someone here ever played Uno? When playing Uno, some say that you can counter a +2 card with a +4 card, while others don't accept this. Still regarding accessibility, but now focusing on cognitive accessibility, Souza and colleagues argue that cognitive accessibility means making information and communication more comprehensible, intuitive, easy to process, and interactive for neurodivergent individuals, for example, dyslexia, aphasia, and intellectual disabilities. According to Aaron, cognitive accessibility in board games is achieved when people are able to play and play well. For this, it is necessary to write and test the rules with a diverse group of people to guarantee that a common understanding of the rules is reached and that the latest version can be used and understood by all. In essence, readers need to understand what is written to play and play well. As explored by Jank and Golzer, effective reading comprehension depends on managing cognitive load, which is the mental effort necessary to process information effectively, as an overwhelming amount of unclear information can hinder understanding and retention. Lastly, regarding rulebook design, there appears to be several general assumptions about the player's gender and their knowledge. Although we acknowledge that there is some change regarding the gender of the players, there is still the assumption that the player is referred as being a he as the default. Some will even have a footnote explaining the choice. For example, in the Tales of the Arabian Nights, it is justified on the grounds of elegance, passing on quoting, "We have chosen to use the masculine pronoun as a generic pronoun instead of the less elegant he/she." Another example is Maple Circus, where it is noted that, and quoting, "male pronouns have been used for simplicity and readability." And although some games have opted for non-gender pronouns in their English version rulebooks, in the rulebooks for languages in which nouns are gendered, they tend to adopt the masculine noun as universal. As is the case with King Domino in its Spanish version, as shown here on the left. Regarding the assumption of what the player knows, rulebooks still assume literacy on the part of players, often a degree of numeracy, an ability to put together complex ideas, and to ascertain precise relationships between game elements from densely interrelated documents. It is also assumed that a player will be able to interpret, understand, and act on this complex information in a timely and enjoyable way. Considering what is mentioned in the article and was briefly mentioned here, there seems to be a need to conceptualize best practices for improving rulebook accessibility. In this sense, we adapted the elements of the accessibility tier down conceptualized by Aaron by adding and revising them to correspond to the specificity of the rulebooks of board games and role-playing games, which I will now present. Start with the recommendations for visual accessibility. It is essential to consider three key factors: color blindness, contrast, and readability. Starting with color blindness, when developing a rulebook, it is important to recognize that there may be some players who are colorblind. Therefore, when referring to specific tokens, it is recommended to mention them according to their rules or identifiable characteristics rather than by their colors. It is also essential to test the color construct to ensure that it does not affect the readability of the text, and to have a clear match between component colors and manual colors to facilitate visual association. Concerning readability, several actions can be taken, mainly the use of sans serif fonts, avoidance of the use of small font size letters, and background images. Moving on to cognitive accessibility, there are 5 key considerations: easy language, flow, clarity, jargon, and consistency. As mentioned in the article, the use of easy language in rulebooks has the potential to reduce the cognitive load of the text. As such, it is recommended to follow easy language guidelines. To ensure that the rulebook has a good flow, it is important to ensure that it is well organized and structured, needing to contextualize the player's role, present the rules and instructions in an orderly, logical, and functional manner, break the text up with images, and avoid using complex conditionals, for example, ifs, buts, excepts, etc. It should also be ensured that the text is as clear as possible. There isn't any ambiguous phrasing, and that the definitions given are clear, so as to not leave any doubt or allow for other interpretations and assumptions. As mentioned here, the presence of jargon can be a barrier for beginners to understand the rules, so it should be avoided. But if it is not possible, then it should be given definitions. Equally important is the use of consistent terms throughout the whole rulebook. So once it has been decided what terms to use and their definitions, no synonyms should be used for that term unless it represents something else. In the physical accessibility category, there are 3 important aspects: the manual size, where it is recommended to have an A5 or A4, so it's easier to maneuver and allows enough space for text and images. It should be easy to find key elements and information in the manual, which can be done through, for example, the use of heading or bold words. And lastly, a digital version of the manual should be made available, as it will allow more people to have access to it. Regarding communication accessibility, it is relevant to consider that instructions shouldn't be presented only in their written form. A balance should be struck between the written instructions presented in a straightforward manner and graphical and image instructions that complement the written content. Moreover, it is also recommended to exercise caution when using cultural references that are only recognized in a particular part of the world or to a specific group of people. For example, names of restaurants / franchises, cartoons, and pop culture. Applied to rulebooks, socioeconomic accessibility relates to representation, the pronouns used, and having suggestions for alternative components. Representation in rulebooks can take several forms and become problematic if not properly considered. For instance, the use of only Western male names for characters instead of names from other regions, and the roles that each character is assigned can also reflect heteronormative, gendered, or culturally biased assumptions. As mentioned, although there have been some changes in the default pronouns used to refer to the player, some newer rulebooks still use masculine pronouns as default. This problem is especially relevant, for example, in languages where, due to language specificities, it is difficult to find the most suitable pronouns, as in Portuguese and Spanish. Having an alternate components section in the rulebook could also help improve the accessibility of the game. In this section, alternatives can be mentioned to replace the provided game tokens with more general or adapted objects. Regarding learning accessibility, the recommendations include disconstructing the stigma associated with having an accessible version of the rulebook, utilizing videos to explain the rules, creating a dedicated document for player aids, and including an explicit note on whether players can use rulebooks to enhance accessibility. Finally, the last recommendation considers the intersections between the above recommendations and their roles in reducing the associated cognitive load that rules can have. For instance, cognitive accessibility is directly linked to communication and learning accessibility, as each consideration will have an impact and influence on the others. Readability is also directly linked to easy language guidelines, as it improves comprehension and perceptibility, which in turn relate to flow, clarity, instructions, and possibly player aids. To conclude this presentation, it is essential to mention that there are still some unanswered questions regarding how to create rulebooks that are accessible and entertaining, and that we have yet to integrate best practices for technical writing within the specific frame of instructional manual. I would like to thank the Fundação para a Ciência e a Tecnologia for financing my PhD. Although you can find all these references in the article, I will also provide the references mentioned throughout this presentation here. And here are the games mentioned. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I am available to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do we have questions? Do we have comments directly here? Yeah, we have directly one from Peter.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting talk and really important thing. Just a couple of comments first. I think this is something that everybody who's making any kind of rule book really does need to consider from the very start. For example, with the board game Wingspan, it became very popular, and then they later printed some more visually acceptable cards to be bought as extras, and then they were kind of maybe a little bit upset that nobody bought them. But if they had been implemented in the first place, it would have been great. And it's something that I myself, when I was reading a different article, I was thinking, wow, like I really never considered a lot of these. So I think a lot of the leaving this out is due to people's just ignorance of the facts. So I think having kind of key guidelines like this is really important. And another point there as well, I was reading Disabled Game Quarterly, I think, and they were talking about how a lot of people have specific screen readers for PDFs that allow them access to these games. And again, something I was completely oblivious to. And then you have big TTRPG producers, especially like Dungeons and Dragons, have been notorious for avoiding PDFs to, avoid copyright. I guess now that they're on online digital versions, maybe helps a lot. And just one quick question about what you said with the the pronoun example, and then I think did you use a Spanish example there, where there like obviously it comes in two versions. In the English example, are you recommending that the best way to do it is he/she, or is there another preferred method? And similarly, does that translate well into other languages? Like a simple kind of catch-all, this is what generally should be used. Yes.
Okay, so in English, I find it relatively easier to adapt to non-specific, non-gendered pronouns. You can use the player, that works. You can use they. So you don't have necessarily, and I won't say that he/she is the best way to present it, as specifically also for cognitive accessibility might be, the cognitive load might be it can hinder that part. So probably the player or they, you don't have to address directly the player. That's what I'm trying to say. So, for example, but in Portuguese or in Spanish, I'll talk in the Portuguese part because I'm Portuguese, so it's easier. The player doesn't work because we have either it's a he or a she. We don't have a non-gendered option, at least not yet. So it's difficult to find a way. We have to think a bit on that part.
Yeah. And I guess, like you said, if you are going to, I guess for people with limited language experience, maybe only having one language, it's difficult for them to understand the differences in languages. And I'm sure there's several others we haven't considered as well. And like you said, when you make it then longer, having both the male and the female one, again, that's adding to the cognitive load. So yeah, I guess it'll be great if there were just one quick simple answer that everyone could use from now on, but language is obviously more complicated than that.
Actually, now I remember some of the options that some editors, some publishers use is to refer to the player in Portuguese, to refer to the player as you. So you do this and you do that, and then you don't have to use gendered pronouns, for instance.
Right. Super, yeah, and that's simple, very nice, and cognitively simple as well. Great.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your questions and comments.
Yeah, I mean, not all languages offer us this nice they there, as English does. And I mean, if I look at German right now, there's a whole culture war fought over how to being inclusive and also not have super long complicated sentences. There are a couple of comments in the Discord, all in Japanese so far. So people thank you for your talk, for the input, and especially those who write rulebooks themselves found it very, very helpful and thought provoking. And Muro Ishii-san commented also about the use of AI, that one may want to think about using writing texts that are not only human readable, but also AI readable. And there are a couple of comments about rulebooks, table talk role-playing game rulebooks, especially those made by the group FEAR, Far East Amusement Research, that commenters think match some of the recommendations you have given in your talk right now. And yes. There are also comments about referencing players differently than using pronouns. One other comment mentions, which is actually right, rule books are not laws. So
Yes.
we are not bound by strict official language, but can come up with new or different terms to circumvent issues of inclusion, for example, by using words that address everyone more easily. Yeah. Oh, everybody is writing just in the chat. Please talk yourselves. If you have more comments or questions, please raise your hand. Yeah, maybe. Jake, I saw you typing. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Katya, for your talk. I just wanted to say that Root, if you've ever heard of that game by Leader Games, it's a good example of a board game that has multiple rule books.
Okay.
There's one that's all text, and it's called The Law of Root, and it's designed for, people that really like an exact explanation and definition for everything. This is what you can do in this situation, all the edge cases and so on. And it's got a very visual one called, Walking Through Route. And it just walks you through the game turn by turn, gives examples, very clear, like, what do you call it? Just pictures and charts. And there's text too as well, but it's just very visual. And there's another one that is just, okay, before you play the game, just read this. If you just read this, it's going to walk you through the game, like holding your hand almost. First, take this piece, then take that one. So anyway, if you're not familiar with it, it might be nice to take a look, just as an example of a game company that tries to do something different than just, okay, here's the rule book, good luck. Because, a lot of my students, I give them a board game in Japanese, and it's their first language is Japanese, and they say, I still don't understand what to do. I said, but it's your native language, right?
Mm.
And they said, yeah, but I still don't understand what to do. I'm like, oh, okay. So, there's YouTube. Check out YouTube.
Yeah.
There's, walkthrough videos on there. So a lot of people are doing that now. They don't even read the rule book. They just go and watch a playthrough or something like that. And, I think that your topic is very, very important to game design today. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you for your comment. I will have to look at. Do you know if the rulebooks are open access from the root
I think
game,
they
or?
might be on Board Game Geek. They
Okay,
probably
perfect.
are. Yeah, I'd be surprised if they're not there. Actually, you know what? I think they are. So just double check
Okay,
Board Game
perfect.
Geek, and it's probably in the files.
Okay, I'll have to check. And I also, the fact that you mentioned the video walkthroughs is actually funny, because I've been doing interviews with publishers and game designers regarding rulebook accessibility. And the game designers specifically mentioned that they don't read the rules. Most of them watch videos on YouTube. So I found that funny because they are game designers. I had this assumption that game designers like to read rule books. I was proven wrong. But yeah, usually they like to watch videos and don't like to read the rules. So
It's totally true.
I mean, game design is a group effort, right? So there's one
Yes.
person who loves rules, and then everybody else, maybe. But I mean, what you just mentioned with walkthroughs, I mean, that has a very long history in Japan. The point that people don't know how to play. I mean, that started a whole genre of books in Japan in the 1980s called replays. And this is now a book about that good old time of when the first replays emerged. So encountering Dungeons and Dragons, Traveller, and so on, people were like, I don't know what to do with this. So people actually from this university, Kyoto University, started writing up their game sessions as transcripted novels so that others could follow what to do in a tabletop role-playing game. And that started a whole genre that is very, very, for a long time was very popular in Japan. And only when YouTube and Twitch and everything came along, you had something similar emerging elsewhere. So there's also a huge market in Japan of fan-made content. So at the game market, which is happening today and tomorrow in Japan, and also the comic market, people are selling their own play sessions as stories. So yeah, Katrin, you raised your hand.
Can't. Okay, the button didn't work. Okay. Hey, thank you a lot. About what you need to play and about how you what you have to learn, or maybe also what actually is in those books that you need for playing. At Bonn University, we have different projects that go a bit into this direction. One is this. Are those game nights that we are doing that are mostly board games. And there we also have people who are there to explain the games to others, because everybody knows that nobody goes there and just plays the board game, although there are the rules in the box, and although they are made by game designers and everything's professional, nobody expects you to learn the game by just reading the rule books. And this is this thing that you have to have somebody who shows you how to do it. And there's another project where which is somebody's doing, we are associated with. It's Harald Eckmüller is trying to write written rules for TTRPGs at the moment. I don't know if he will manage to do it, because yeah, it's just all those rules that you learn by watching those actual plays or videos or instructions that you need to watch, because you don't learn it by reading the rules. There are actually rules, and you can write them down, but everybody thinks you have to know them, and they just don't write them down. That's the hypothesis. So that what are those unwritten rules you have to know that you usually just learn by playing? And I think there are some maybe you can just learn by playing, but there are also a lot of rules that are just unwritten, like how you interact, how you communicate with each other, or that you are allowed to make up things. So, and this is also a thing we have a lot with those one-page RPGs or these micro RPGs, that you think it's a really, really small game, so it's easy to learn it, but it's so small because everybody who plays them is expected to know all those unwritten rules you have to know before you play it. And yeah, I think it will be interesting what you can actually write down, or maybe also to compare how you play after just reading the rules and learning it from actual play or learning it from a group. I think this would also be interesting, comparing this.
Yeah, it would be interesting if they write any paper regarding that. Please share with me. I would love to read the paper about the comparison, because I'm doing something similar for my PhD. I will be using original rule books, accessible rule books, and then visual videos, and then compare the results. I'll have different groups playing the game based on those rule books and then compare them. So it's kind of similar. So I would love to read if they ever write a paper on it.
We have two more comments in the Discord. One is from Moroishi-san about how they teach LARP at the game market in very short sessions, which in essence eschew long explanations, but have people learn by doing. And I think also that is an interesting approach for potential rulebook design for other type of games. And as a best practice example, Fujibayashi-san mentions Tenra Bansho Zero, which is one of the first Japanese language tabletop role-playing games being translated into English. It should be available on Drive-Thru RPG as a way of maybe for you to look at the different types of how people have done books. Peter has raised his hand. We are officially now, just a minute, we are officially now in the general discussion time, and I wanted to briefly ask if people would like to take maybe a 5-minute break, and then we come together for the last part of today. Peter, you feel free to ask your question, and then we come back with the answer. So we make a cliffhanger. You ask your question, then we go on the break, and then we come back here.
Perfect. Actually, just a very quick comment, just based on what Jake said there, because what he said wasn't quite registering with me about root. And while the other comments were going on, I looked it up. It's very interesting, and this might be useful for your research as well, where the board game root seems to have two different rule books. One kind of a rules encyclopedia, and the other a more visual walkthrough. The role-playing game route is what I was thinking of, which is actually quite standard TTRPG dense rule book. So it might be seen that we're seeing developments in the quality and accessibility of board game rule books, but not so much in role-playing. And maybe that's part of the expectation that people have, that, you know, TTRPG rulebooks should be like this, and it's not developing as quickly because obviously it's a smaller thing. And then just the final comment is working off the back of what Ole just mentioned there about introductory games. A great introduction for me was Call of Cthulhu, the kind of choose your own adventure. It says, don't bother reading the rule book, get into this, and as the rules come up, we'll point you to where you need to go as well. So I think that can be a really accessible way, because those TTRPG rule books can be huge and really intimidating as well. So sorry, just those comments. And if you want to go to break, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I think some of us need, especially our interpreters, would, I guess, cherish a few minutes break. So it's now 10:39 here. So let's say we reconvene in about 5 minutes for a last few few comments and questions. Okay, so thank you again, Katja.
Thank
and
you.
Everyone, and yeah, see you all back here in a few minutes. By the way, Jake has posted everything on Law of Root on the Discord.